Hello and welcome to this special edition of India's EV mission. Just as the COP26 summit in Glasgow begins to wind up, India has supported the COP26 declaration to accelerate the transition from internal combustion engines. The Niti Aayog has highlighted the need to transition the country's large fleet of 2- and 3-wheelers, which comprise 80% of the automobiles, to zero-emission vehicles. But how do Indian states fare in terms of EV adoption? Now let's look at the electric vehicle numbers. In 2021, the overall EV adoption in India stands at 1.6%. That's 2.3 lakh electric vehicles out of a total 1 crore 39 lakh vehicles registered in India this year. But there has been an almost 90% increase in the number of electric vehicles on India's roads compared to last year. Now, among the states, let's begin with Delhi. Delhi clearly leads the pack. In Q2, Delhi's EV penetration has gone up to 7% of the vehicles registered in Delhi. This year, close to 20,000 out of 3.8 lakh vehicles registered in Delhi were EVs. That's 5%, well above the national average. The next big state, Karnataka, 2.6% of the total vehicles in the state are EVs. That is 25,905 vehicles out of the total 10 lakh vehicles in the states. Now, in Maharashtra, which recently came up with an EV policy, 1.3% of the vehicles are EVs. That is 20,630 vehicles out of 15.8 lakh vehicles in the state. The EV penetration in Rajasthan, UP and Uttarakhand is approximately 2%, Gujarat is at 0.6% and Tamil Nadu at 1.8%. As of today, more than 14 states have their own EV policies, but Delhi clearly leading the pack there. Now let's introduce all our guests this evening. We're joined by Mahua Acharya, the MD and CEO of CESL. We're also joined by Jasmine Shah, Vice Chairperson of the Delhi Dialogue and Development Commission, Government of Delhi. Ankur Thadani, Partner, TPG Rise Climate Fund. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Jasmine Shah, I'd like to begin with you. 7% EV penetration in Delhi. Strong and robust steps towards EV adoption. How do you see these numbers increasing? How do you think you'll finish this fiscal, and what kind of numbers do you expect next year?
Thank you, Parikshit, for having me on this show and for this very important discussion. I think the experience of Delhi shows that a well thought through roadmap with a comprehensive action plan that addresses each and every aspect of the EV ecosystem, be it charging infrastructure, well-targeted purchase incentives, demand generation by doing consumer campaigns, are all very important. You can't do one and not do the others. But more importantly, it is about setting targets, ambitious targets, and holding yourself accountable to those targets. Ours was the first policy when we introduced it just about a year ago, which very clearly said that we aspire, it was not an easy target for us to put our neck out and say, but we said we aspire to reach 25% penetration of EVs in just 3 years. And questions were being asked saying that, you guys don't know what you are saying. But I am glad to note that, we followed through from the point of declaring our vision to taking various actions over the last 1 year, which I'm sure we can talk about. We've reached to the point of being the only mid to large Indian state that has reached 7%. We hope to end our second year of our EV policy, which is mid of next year, at around 10 to 15%. And if we reach that 10 to 15%, you start seeing something magical happens. You start seeing visibility of EVs on each and every street of your city. And that is where we feel from the second to third year, we should be able to get to 25% target.
Right. So that's a great target to hear about, that Delhi could have an EV penetration of almost 15% by middle of next year. Mahua Acharya, if I can come to you, you recently closed bids for the 3-wheeler EV tender. That's likely to be awarded soon. Give us a sense of the kind of response you've got from states, the kind of orders that you're getting from states for electric 3-wheelers and electric 2-wheelers.
Thank you. Thanks, Parikshit. Thank you for having me at this show. It's great to hear from others as well in the industry. Yes, we just closed the 3-wheeler tender. And in fact, as I speak today, last night is when we actually closed it, in the sense that we asked we offered all the contenders and bidders if they would like to come in and match prices. And I'm happy to note that three more of the biggest companies in the country did come in to match prices on the basis that they would like to go ahead with this program. They would like to go ahead and support a government program. And I'm, of course, quite encouraged by that, also quite grateful for the participation of the industry. The level of demand coming in from states has been nothing short of phenomenal. There is, I personally did not expect as much demand for vehicles such as freight. There's a very big demand for garbage loaders. It's just that much cheaper to manage an electric vehicle for garbage loading and for delivery of freight. But also, there is demand for the typical auto rickshaw, right? What in this world we call passenger. There is demand coming for that. So as far as the demand side is concerned, that demand is coming up, has been coming up, and it is bigger than I expected. It's bigger than any of us here expected. We now have to sort through that demand and figure out what is the best financing solution to manage this or to respond to this demand. Because of course, we as a single entity will not be in a position to finance this entire set of vehicles. So in a way, our next challenge or our next task is to discuss with financiers on what it would take for them to come in as well into the business of electric vehicle penetration and further vehicle penetration.
Okay, I want to ask you, you're saying that you closed the bids yesterday. Give us a sense of the number of companies which have bid for the EV tender, and how many electric three-wheelers would this be for?
We had 21 bidders, and we find the price reduction that has been discovered is between 12 and 20%. 20% has been the lowest reduction, so it's been a very, very good participation. The demand that we had aggregated before floating of this tender is upwards of 80,000.
Okay, so that is a big number of electric three-wheelers. Ankur, if I could get you in, as you're listening to Mahua Acharya and Jasmine Shah, of course, the EV story looks encouraging. Some states, of course, at 1%, 2%. Delhi is now inching towards the 8 or 10% mark. What is the level of interest among private equity investors when it comes to OEMs in India? There are several OEMs right now who are in the market asking for money, looking for funds to for the next phase of their EV program. So what is the level of interest among PE investors? What are they really looking for in an OEM in India when they decide to make that investment?
Sure. So firstly, Parikshit, thank you for having me, and good to be among my panelists. So like Mahua and Jasmine both were saying, this is an ecosystem play, right, Parikshit? So there are various elements of building blocks of this ecosystem. There's charging infrastructure, there's the demand element, there is the supply element. I think Mahua's point on 80,000 units being part of the tender is a very encouraging early point on demand. And we've also seen that in our work. But from a supply standpoint, right, you have to look at supply across various EV categories or other OEM categories. That's two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, passenger vehicle, commercial vehicle, and see where does the TCO benefit lie, right? So because as we all know, consumers in India are extremely value conscious. They understand what their cost of ownership looks like, particularly in the era where petrol, diesel are about 100 rupees per liter. They understand TCO, and I think they are beginning to adopt that TCO philosophy very, very strongly. So when we look at, or I would say when I say we, it's the private equity universe, we really look at being the growth catalyst or the force multipliers for these businesses, right? So we are really looking at OEMs that are putting strategic focus in this space, because in some ways, you can argue whether this is 2 years out or 5 years out or 10 years out, but reality is that the world is moving towards EV, and so is India in a very dominant fashion. And OEMs that are sort of playing this game early in a more holistic manner, which is not just doing 1 or 2 models, but a holistic model launch across the price points, across spectrums, as well as doing it in a TCO effective manner, would really lead this race. And that's what we would look for, which is who's doing it in a strategic manner, who's doing this in a TCO positive manner for consumers, and ultimately who's doing this in a unit economic manner, which is positive and viable and scalable. So I would say those are the 2 or 3 elements that come from a supply standpoint, because there's demand, but until supply catches up as well in terms of models across the spectrum, you will not see the EV adoption curve really go up in any kind of sort of slope that we're talking about.
Right. Interesting points there. And Jasmine Shah, if I can come to you, recently you launched a scheme where you would charge just about 2,500 rupees for setting up a private charging station. And this would apply for the first 30,000 applicants. Tell us how this scheme is likely to work. Who is this for? Is it for private persons? Is it only for light commercial vehicles and big businesses, fleet owners? Who does this really work for? What is the charging penetration in Delhi currently? And how many charging stations would you like to have by the end of next year?
So Parikshit, our EV policy very clearly lays out the emphasis not just on public charging stations, which is what governments usually tend to focus on, but also encouraging private players. And it could be semi-private places. It could be workplace charging. It could be society level charging. It could be charging happening in malls, restaurants, hospitals, colleges, everywhere. Our vision is that wherever your vehicle stops in Delhi, you should be able to find a charging point. And if we have to enable that, then we have to also subsidize. We thought a smart subsidy to at least encourage slow charging, because we know that the Delhi's or India's EV transition is all about getting 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers to transition to EVs. They don't need expensive fast chargers. They need slow chargers. And thankfully, with the new light EV AC charger that has been notified by BIS just a couple of months back, the cost of the chargers have also come down. Delhi is the first city to have done a city-wide empanelment process and creating a single window facility through discoms. So if you are a mall owner, you don't need to figure out what technologies do I choose from, how do I apply to the discom, how do I avail a Delhi government subsidy. You just make one phone call to your discom or go to the website of your discom and say exactly what charges you need. And everything gets rolled into this entire facility, inclusive of availing the EV tariff, which is at 4.5 rupees for consumers in Delhi. So we are targeting through this 30,000 such private chargers to be set up in Delhi in the next 2 years. And this is apart from the public charging stations, which today we already have around 150 public charging stations and around 300 points in Delhi. But this number could very well reach to close to 1,000 public charging points in Delhi in the next 1 year itself. But we will also see 30,000 private points. And that is what we mean by making charging ubiquitous in Delhi.
Right. So that's a strong point. We want to have 1,000 public charging stations and 30,000 private charging stations. We're going to take a short break, but this is a great conversation. Don't go anywhere. Our updates and views from our guests continue on India's EV mission right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching India's EV mission. India at COP26 has committed to accelerating adoption of zero-emission vehicles. Let me go across to Mahua Acharya, MD and CEO of CSL. Mahua Acharya, now there are several pieces of the EV puzzle. When India has this target of making this big transition towards zero-emission vehicles, what is the main piece that we need to focus on, something that you at CSL are also trying to crack?
Sure. Once again, Parikshit, thanks for having me here. What is the one piece that it's a very ambitious target, and it's really commendable to see that level of ambition, not just at the central level, but across states and across institutions, across government departments as well. So I can happily say that this ambition is reflected across the lines. What is the one piece? It's hard to say in the EV business, is there really one piece? I mean, the industry itself is still in early stages. Financing is most certainly a very, very big challenge. It's the cost of capital there is hardly any financing for some segments because upfront costs are high, so one has to bring them down. Lenders are still a little averse. So one has to crack a little bit of this financing down to the consumer. Supply, I know colleagues also raised the supply situation. I think most certainly in some sectors, I know, for example, in the two-wheeler industry, a number of companies did not anticipate this level of demand. So we have a supply shortage. In the four-wheeler business, we also have a supply shortage. We don't have so many vehicles as well right now on the roads, yet demand completely has overtaken the level of supply. For example, in the four-wheelers that we lease out to government departments, we have an order book that's absolutely many times the availability. So there are a number of things that one has to single-mindedly or with very serious focus get down to cracking. And at CSL and as through the government that we're supporting and building out this ecosystem, we've been able to access the industry, access the demand and supply through the aggregation of demand, because a lot of states are not always able to, well, there are benefits to putting your demand into an aggregated entity. We're also working on the charging infrastructure. There's a whole host of obstacles that one has to overcome to get to the level of charging infrastructure that we want and we need, that most countries in this level of EV development need. There's software. I mean, there are a number of things. So I can't say there's one, but there are definitely big items and a list of smaller items that need heavy focus to overcome.
Okay. One quick question, Mahua Acharya. What is like your internal target in terms of EV penetration by 2025 and 2030 if we look at India overall?
That's an easier one for me to answer because we've been mandated by the government to aggregate demand for 300,000 three-wheelers. We've been mandated by the government of India to roll the FAME 2 subsidy out for buses, and for which the subsidy that's available is it's almost 3,500 buses. So that automatically becomes our own demand. As far as the four-wheeler segment is concerned, we have overshot that. So we've got very high targets already set on us.
Okay. Ankur, if I can get you in right now, startups versus legacy players. There has been a debate on who will win this EV race. It has been said that when it comes to EVs, startups and legacy players are on the same starting line. When it comes to PE investors like yours, how do you see startups in the EV space versus some of the legacy players, the kind of performance, the kind of investments, and the kind of products that they have on the roads right now?
Sure. So, Parikshit, I wish I had the crystal ball and to tell you exactly who's going to win this. But look, I think there are pros and cons on both sides, right? If you think about traditional OEMs, they have the benefit of brand equity in the market. They have the benefit of sort of knowing what it takes to execute on an automotive level. And they have the benefit of the front-end sales and distribution network. All of that in India, as you know, is a very complex market, very hard to build, takes decades to do that. There are clear reasons why some of the global OEMs like General Motors or Ford have struggled in India, right? So that's sort of invaluable. Having said that, EVs are sort of migrating from today what I would call as retrofitted EVs, which is take IC powertrains and put EV powertrains into it and launch that vehicle. And then there is the born EV, which is what Tesla is doing, or some of the Chinese OEMs are doing, or the new entrants in India are doing. Now, eventually the market will go to born EVs, and in that sort of curve, I would say the new entrants have slight advantage because they bring a very fresh thinking, right? If you think about a traditional OEM is trying to pivot from what they've been doing for the last 2-3 decades into a new complete architecture of what a car should look like, versus a fresh player who's just coming in de novo. So that R&D capability is something I think the traditional OEMs really have to invest behind. But having said that, I think one cannot sort of discount the execution and brand equity and the front-end sales and distribution network of traditional OEMs that exist in the market.
Right. So you are saying that you cannot discount the traditional well-established OEMs, but some of the startups may have an advantage when it comes to born EVs. I'm running out of time. I would have liked to ask Jasmine Shah about their plans to scrap subsidies for electric cars, focus only on fleet two-wheelers and three-wheelers when it comes to electric vehicles. We've completely run out of time, but I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this special broadcast. Mahua Acharya, Ankur Tadani, and Jasmine Shah. It's been a great conversation here on CNBC TV 18. Thank you very much for joining us.
For Pinku Oberoi,